With every thrilling ride comes a promise of safety, but sometimes that promise is broken. From operator errors to glaring safety violations, here are 7 infamous amusement park disasters. Number 1. The Son of Beast roller coaster accidents. It's a beautiful summer's day during the holiday season in Mason, Ohio. Friends and family have traveled to enjoy the rides and attractions at Kings Island. The amusement park boasts the biggest wooden roller coaster in the world, Son of Beast. But at 4:45 p.m. on July 9, 2006, screams ring out, but not the ones you'd typically expect from a roller coaster. The Son of Beast ride malfunctioned, resulting in a total of 27 people being rushed to the hospital with mostly chest and neck injuries. One of the victims said, quote, "When we hit, immediately it was like hitting a brick wall. You just know, wait a minute, that's not part of the ride." She recalled her thoughts going through the loop. Quote, "I was thinking, oh my God, we're going to die. We're going to die." Thankfully, none of the victims were critically injured, and most of them could leave after 5 hours. However, this incident was not isolated. It was one of many on this notoriously dangerous roller coaster. Son of Beast was initially a highly ambitious project, costing the owner, Paramount Parks, $20 million for construction. Roller coaster engineer Werner Stengel designed the ride, a legend in the industry. He is credited with creating the first ever modern looping coaster, Revolution, in 1976. The park announced plans to build the ride in 1999. Stengel was involved in the early design of the ride, but the Roller Coaster Corporation of America undertook most building work. Construction involved 2.5 million board feet of wood, 2,400 concrete footers, and 225,000 21-inch steel bolts. The ride was named after the biggest roller coaster globally, the Beast, and was supposed to continue this legacy. The Son of Beast became the first ever wooden hypercoaster over 200 feet. It also had a 118-foot-tall vertical loop and traveled at 78 miles per hour. The ride's size and structure broke 7 world records and was characterized by its terrifying speeds and multiple drops. Son of Beast had issues right from the get-go. During its construction, a 50 by 100-foot section of wooden supports collapsed due to strong gusts of wind. Later on, Paramount Parks would fire the Roller Coaster Corporation of America and finish the project themselves. Things didn't get much better. The ride was first opened on April 28, 2000, but had to be closed the same day to repair a small area of the track. With the opening day already delayed, an additional month was an unexpected setback. Son of Beast's first year went on to have further track and sensor malfunctions. It became notoriously rough and would often jolt. Since the park was now losing money and damaging its reputation, it sued the Roller Coaster Corporation of America for damages, but lost the case. Later that year, while in motion, the Son of Beast stopped abruptly. Although there were no injuries, the passengers had descended via the staircase, and the ride was shut down for 3 hours. Inspectors discovered a rough 15-foot section of track. In 2001, 2 more incidents occurred. One left a rider with a broken vertebrae, the other a broken neck. Then in 2003, someone who hurt their back was admitted to the hospital. Despite this, no design flaws were reported to be responsible. Instead, the injuries were attributed to the victim's pre-existing conditions. No further information was published about them. However, July 9, 2006 was different. Late that afternoon, one of the trains, which was passing through, cracked a support beam. The accident took place in the Rose Bowl, which is halfway through the ride. Although this train made it back safely, this crack would prove problematic for the next train. The lack of support led to sagging in the track, which was further exacerbated when the force of the second carriage passed through. However, the crash didn't stop the train, and the carriage made its way back to the loading station. A vertical wooden support was simply unable to carry the weight, forcing it to crack as well. The ride jolted abruptly, leaving riders with multiple injuries. Thankfully, nobody died. What separates this incident from other accidents was that the ride's designers were responsible. A state ride inspector said that the wooden support beams were, quote, cracked and had actually splintered in places. There was also an abrupt bump, which he believes was why people were injured. The Ohio Department of Agriculture, which is also the authority responsible for roller coaster safety, said that the beam caused a, quote, slight dip in the track, resulting in a, quote, pothole effect, injuring riders. Theme park consultant Dennis Spiegel said, quote, "It's not unusual to have timbers break in wooden roller coasters. As coasters have stresses placed on them, and as they age, they will have those kind of situations." Jennifer Wright was among the 27 victims and took Paramount Parks to court. Part of her evidence was a video interview with Rick Schmizzy, who the Ohio Department of Agriculture assigned to investigate the incident. The investigator gave quite a damning reflection on what happened. Schmizzy claimed that the park should have known that an accident like this could happen since its inception. He testified during the court proceedings saying, quote, "They would fix them in a Band-Aid style and then wait and see what happened. They never really stopped and said, 'We got a problem with this ride as a whole.'" Additionally, the investigator said there was, quote, "excessive lateral motion where the track would constantly sway from side to side. This led to loose timber connections, wearing of bolt holes, track misalignment, and unexpected vibration." He explained that fixing issues on one part moved the problems onto another part of the track. Jonathan Yannick also took the park to court after suffering a shoulder injury that required surgery. The lawsuit asked for $500,000 in compensatory damages and more than $350,000 in punitive damages. Other lawsuits were filed, but most of them reached settlements. Both Jennifer Wright and Jonathan Yannick wanted to bring this to trial, so it would be made public, and nothing like this would be allowed to happen again. The victim said that when individuals agree to settlements instead of going to court, the public often assumes that the claimant was simply looking for money. The pair were confident that there was wrongdoing, feeling unthreatened by the multi-million-dollar company's high-paid lawyers. Wright said, quote, "All I ever wanted was the truth to come out and no one to ever be hurt again. I am still fighting and would love to offer any help or evidence. I still feel their pain and suffering." Eventually, Wright accepted damages on the basis that Schmizzy's testimony was made public. She said, quote, "I would feel like garbage if I held on to this information, and then a year from now somebody was really hurt bad." After the incident, the general consensus was that the most sensible option would be to close the ride forever. The editor of Theme Park Insider, Robert Niles, said, quote, "A broken main support beam on a roller coaster is like a broken leg on a racehorse. Sure, you could spend many millions to repair it, but in most cases, you'd just put her down." But the park didn't put her down. Instead, the ride continued after a number of changes, most notably removing its vertical loop, which they denied was related to the incident. Kings Island spokesperson Don Helbig said, quote, "The removal of the loop was a decision the park made so we could use different trains. The trains the ride now uses are lighter and more comfortable than the original trains." The decision not to retire the ride would come back to haunt the park in 2009 with yet another accident. According to Dayton Daily News, Jill Tavella said she, quote, "felt dizzy and had a bad headache after riding the roller coaster on May 31st and was later diagnosed with a, quote, broken blood vessel in her head." However, an investigation into the incident cleared the park of any wrongdoing. Nonetheless, the park was still reluctant to reopen the ride. Speaking at the time, Kings Island General Manager Greg Scheid said, quote, 8 days after I took over, the accident occurred. We have struggled with it ever since. We have smoothed out the ride. Most people will say they are comfortable with the ride, but I am not comfortable with the ride." Subsequently, the Son of Beast never ran again. The park never announced its retirement. Instead, the ride just faded out of existence. In 2010, the ride had disappeared from the park's website. Then in 2012, the ride was demolished, and all of those years of building and maintaining the ride was now reduced to rubble on the ground. The park was left with a $10 million loss. Paramount Parks wanted to sue the Roller Coaster Corporation of America, but that company went bankrupt in 2005. Kings Island then shifted its focus on suing the now-defunct company's insurance provider. In 2008, they lost the case, costing the company even more in legal fees. This was on top of the settlements paid to the dozens of people who were injured by the roller coaster. It's hard to look back at the Son of Beast ride as anything but a complete disaster, both in terms of how it put people's lives at risk and how it was a colossal waste of money. Hopefully, the park and the industry as a whole will learn lessons from it. In the Son of Beast place at Kings Island is an entirely different ride and a commemorative tombstone to it where riders queue. The new attraction's name is aptly called the Banshee, a wailing ghost in Irish mythology, while the ghost of the Son of Beast lives on. The Icon Park Drop Tower incident happened in 2022. Now that the final investigation has been published, I've updated the episode with the latest information. Screams of excitement echo through Orlando's Icon Park as the ride ascends the world's tallest freestanding drop tower. The round vehicle rotates as it rises 430 feet high. With every second, the guests get more excited. Once they reach the top, they will be dropped into a freefall to experience the ultimate adrenaline rush. There's a kid on the ride, however, that seems to lack enthusiasm. He's frightened, and for a good reason. He feels something's wrong. After a brief pause at a daunting height, the ride begins to fall. The free fall lasts for just a couple of seconds before magnetic brakes engage. When the ride finally returns to the ground, the frightened kid is gone. His seat is empty. As realization sets in, other guests can be heard screaming in panic. A park visitor recorded a video of the incident, which quickly spread on social media. Drop towers are categorized as super rides, the ultimate attraction of amusement parks worldwide. A lure for thrill seekers and adrenaline junkies, they offer the excitement that can't be found in ordinary joy rides. That's what makes them super rides, after all. But apart from excitement, super rides are not without risks to riders. Very often there's a thin line between these two. At Icon Park on International Drive in Orlando, Florida, the FreeFall Tower has been one of the most popular attractions since its opening in December of 2021. The ride ascends to a height of 430 feet. At the top, the seats tilt forward by 30 degrees before plummeting nearly 400 feet towards the ground. During the drop, riders experience an astonishing speed of 75 miles per hour. It was manufactured by the renowned amusement ride company from Austria, Fun Time Rides, and was operated by the Slingshot Group. As Coaster College on YouTube has pointed out, there have been two further recent incidents at Slingshot's rides. In September of 2020, a maintenance worker died after falling off Icon Park's Orlando Starflyer. Then, months later in March 2021, a cable snapped on the Slingshot ride at Old Town in Kissimmee due to suspected operator error. So now, one can ask if these were isolated events, or if there's possibly a pattern of safety issues with the Slingshot Group. When Tyree Sampson came to ride the drop tower on March 24, 2022, it had been in operation for only 3 months. As the park's latest attraction, everyone was eager to try it, so was Tyree. Tick, as his friends called him, was an exemplary 14-year-old boy from St. Louis, Missouri, who was visiting Orlando for a football program. He was a promising talent with high hopes of establishing a career in the sport. At his age, Tyree was just a kid who wanted to play football and have fun. Icon Park seemed like the perfect place to go. However, there was a slight problem that prevented Tyree from enjoying his visit. He was a pretty big boy for a 14-year-old at 6 foot 5 inches tall and 340 pounds. For this reason, he had been turned away from 2 rides at the park, including the giant Slingshot, another top-rated attraction. But Tyree was determined to go on one of the super rides and tried his luck at the drop tower around 11:30 p.m. Surprisingly, he was allowed to take one of the 30 seats. A friend who came with him also went for a ride. Being a big kid, Tyree was feeling uncomfortable in his seat. The vehicle ascended and reached the top 430 feet above the ground. Then, as it was unhooked, it began to freefall. About 5 seconds and 400 feet later, the ride started to slow down under the force of the magnets. At this height, Tyree dropped out of his seat and fell to the ground. The park crew rushed to the scene, but there was little they could do. Almost immediately, a local 911 operator received a call from a disturbed witness reporting that someone had fallen off a ride at Icon Park. It didn't take long for paramedics to arrive and transport the boy to the hospital. But it was too late. Tyree Sampson died from his injuries. The same night, Firefighters and law enforcement officers shut down the ride. On the next day, March 25th, an inspector from the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Affairs arrived at the scene to check the safety of the drop tower, especially of the seat from which Tyree Sampson fell. Once in a seat, riders on the FreeFall tower are held in place by hydraulic over-the-shoulder restraints. These contain the rider firmly, leaving no room for movement once locked. It was found that the restraint on Tyree's place was in a down position and locked when the ride stopped. Every seat at the drop tower is equipped with a proximity sensor that detects if the restraint is in the correct position and locked. A green light above the seat turns on only when the sensor detects the restraint. The ride vehicle is programmed to be unable to ascend unless all riders are locked in their seats. Moments after the fall, operators were heard discussing whether the seat was locked. One then confirms that everything was in order by clearly stating that the light had been on.
I don't know. Did you check it? Yeah, the light was on. You guys are sure you checked it? We did, yeah. The light was on.
Before the tower first opened in December 2021, officials inspected the ride and found no defects on any of the systems included. Since it was a brand new ride, the next inspection was scheduled for June 2022. 3 months after the tragedy. Florida officials hired Quest Engineering and Failure Analysis Incorporated to investigate the accident. They measured the average restraint opening for seats on the ride at 3.33 inches, which is considered within the normal safety range. Contrary to standard settings, the restraint opening on Tyree's seat was manually adjusted to an expanded 7.19 inches. The harness sensor in his seat had been manually loosened, adjusted, and tightened. This misadjustment of Tyree's proximity sensor improperly satisfied the ride's electronic safety mechanisms. Specifically, the ride's sensor lights illuminated, signaling that the ride was safe to operate, even though this wasn't the case. The report confirmed that, during slowing of the ride, Tyree Sampson slipped through the gap between the seat and the harness. There were no mechanical or electrical failures. Operator error is suspected as the accident's primary cause. But investigators also mentioned many other potential contributions. Particular attention has been paid to the ride's operating manual and the listed requirements for riders. It states a maximum weight limit of 286 pounds. Late Tyree Sampson was, as mentioned, a big kid and weighed 340 pounds, about 50 pounds above the limit. The drop tower's manual explicitly tells operators to, quote, be careful when seeing if large guests fit into the seats. Check that they fit within the contours of the seat and the bracket fits properly. If this is not so, do not let this person ride. And for a good reason, that is. Once the ride enters freefall, guests experience intense G-forces that would lift them out of their seats, making a properly closed shoulder restraint crucial. In the days following the accident, amusement ride safety experts came forward, calling out that the drop tower's design didn't include any seatbelts connecting the shoulder restraints to the bottom of the seat. Some freefall rides at major amusement parks, like the one at Universal's Islands of Adventure 3 miles north of Icon Park, include a seatbelt in addition to over-the-shoulder harnesses. However, Funtime Rides quotes a safety certification stating that the restraint system is adequate. Quote, it has 2 independent locking devices, and the shoulder restraints are monitored. It is no need for extra safety or seatbelt because the seat and restraint system fulfill more than the requirements. Meanwhile, Tyree Sampson's family took legal action. They filed a lawsuit against several parties associated with the drop tower, including Icon Park, the ride's operator Slingshot, the ride manufacturer, and the producer of the chairs. The lawsuit primarily cited the absence of posted weight limits and alleged operator errors as the key contributors to the accident. Within a short period, the family reached an undisclosed settlement with Icon Park and Slingshot. As for the foreign manufacturers, the legal battle continued. Given the severity of the incident and public safety concerns, the Orlando FreeFall drop tower was ultimately dismantled and removed from the site. Leaving Icon Park behind, Lightwater Valley's Twister roller coaster was plagued with problems that caused not one, but two tragic accidents. Riding the Treetop Twister roller coaster was supposed to be a fun adrenaline rush, but two major accidents involving the coaster at Lightwater Valley turned out to be a life-altering experience for more than one family. It's a balmy Wednesday afternoon in June at the Lightwater Valley amusement park in North Yorkshire. Two Durham University friends are looking forward to celebrating the completion of their second year of varsity. 20-year-old Gemma Savage is due to receive her exam results the next day. She is studying towards a biomedical sciences degree, but tragically, Gemma will not walk out of the park alive. The Treetop Twister opened in May 2001 and was billed as a white-knuckle ride. The 49-foot-high attraction is a hybrid of a roller coaster and a so-called waltzer, more commonly known as a spinning or wild mouse coaster. The individual cars seat 4 riders across and pivots on the track, much like a carousel. During the ride, they reach speeds of up to 30 miles per hour. Gemma's boyfriend, Joseph Shimon, would later tell an inquest hearing that Gemma wasn't worried about the ride, and it didn't seem that scary because of its height restriction of only 3 feet 7 inches. But during the ride, their carriage suddenly stopped, and Joseph says staff told them to remain seated before their car started moving again. The two spotted another car ahead of them and immediately knew something was wrong. Their car started accelerating down the U-shaped bend, smashing into the one in front of them, which propelled them backwards, crashing into a car that was behind them at maximum speed at the bottom of the turn. Joseph suffered whiplash injuries and back pain in that second collision and momentarily lost consciousness. But when he came to, he thought Gemma was knocked out as her head was drooping and she was making snoring noises. He could not have imagined that her injuries were fatal. Sadly, Gemma would succumb to neck and head injuries at the Leeds General Infirmary. 3 teenager boys also involved in the collision were treated at Harrogate District Hospital for stomach injuries, whiplash, and 1 teen with a broken arm. 3 years later, in 2004, Gemma's family would finally get some answers from the inquest into her death. Unfortunately, it would not be the answers they had hoped to get. The family had hoped to hear a verdict of unlawful killing, which relates to criminal negligence, but the court found the cause to be death by misadventure. In English law, this term means a death related to a risk taken willingly. During the inquest, the jury had heard that the collision happened when engineer Eric Butters was trying to lower some cars that were stopped as a safety precaution by the coaster's computer system. Because coasters do not have traditional onboard braking mechanisms, the track is split into chunks called block sections, governed by the ride's computer. This system only allows one train to be in a section at a time, preventing trains or cars from ever coming into contact or colliding with each other. The engineer, however, reportedly did not engage the emergency stop button, which would have shut the computer down. This meant that both the software and the engineer tried to control the ride simultaneously, leading to the collision. By design, however, the manual override should not have worked without hitting the emergency button. But according to reports, the override was only possible due to faulty wiring. According to testimony at the inquest, tests conducted by coaster manufacturer Reverchon, the installers, and an independent inspection body failed to detect the faulty wiring that overrode the emergency system. In fact, Health and Safety Executive Amusement Ride Engineer John Madden discovered a catalog of human errors and mechanical faults that led to the Treetop Twister accident. The French designers of the Twister, Reverchon Industries SA, were charged and fined a total of £175,000 for failing to ensure the safe design and construction of the coaster. Park owners Lightwater Valley Attractions were fined a combined total of £110,000 for safety breaches and legal costs. Electrician Eric Butters was cumulatively fined £3,000 at Leeds Crown Court after pleading guilty to health and safety breaches. The treetop twister was renamed the Twister soon after the accident and continued operating. It would, however, not be the last time that emergency services would rush to attend an incident at the Twister. On Friday, May 31, 2019, a 7-year-old and his family visited Lightwater Valley as a half-term treat from school. But what started as a fun family day soon turned out to be a life-changing event when the boy fell nearly 15 feet to the ground. The boy, who was in the Twister carriage with his mother, slid out of his restraints and over the top of the seat as the ride rushed toward the souvenir camera point. Riders are strapped into the coaster cars by a lap bar, and one witness said they saw the child was free of his restraints. Eyewitness Mark Sharnley was at the park with his wife and kids when he saw the youngster hanging backwards from the carriage as his mother screamed hysterically.
We just looked up for the carriages. It was about 15 foot off the floor, and there was a guy, the lad was hanging backwards outside of the actual carriage. Somehow he got out of the actual restraint and was hanging out backwards from the carriage, his head kind of backwards over.
When he looked up, the 7-year-old was hanging outside the carriage. Sharnley said he must have somehow got himself out of his restraints before he plummeted face down to the floor at a height of approximately 15 feet.
Everybody started shouting, trying to get attention of the actual guy running the machine, but he didn't actually see what happened. He eventually did notice and stopped the machine altogether, and that's when the guys who were with me jumped over the barrier to see how the lad was.
John Philo could not wait for the ride to stop before running to the victim's aid. He was the first person on the scene risking his life by jumping over the fence and crossing the tracks while the coaster was still in motion. He says what he saw was shocking. Philo recounted the scary moment when he reached the motionless child, saying the boy had facial injuries, which he won't soon forget. He stayed with him for more than an hour, saying his son assisted the paramedics in guiding the air ambulance's landing. The child was alert and conscious when emergency services reached the scene and was airlifted to Leeds General Infirmary, where his condition was later described as life-threatening. Miraculously, he survived. The 7-year-old, who may not be named for legal reasons, suffered severe head injuries, leaving him in the hospital for a month. His mother told the court in December 2020 that the little boy she had taken to Lightwater Valley on that fateful day was not the same child that woke up after the surgery, saying she still grieves for her son. Park enthusiasts had reportedly been complaining about the Twister for some time in the months following the accident, saying that a litany of mechanical problems had been impacting their enjoyment of the coaster. One social media post read that the Twister had stopped on 3 separate occasions mid-ride at different intervals. Another user said the Twister had problems with the safety bar mechanism, impacting the wait time, but added that the ride was later closed for maintenance. According to another park enthusiast, her daughter didn't feel very safe when she was on the Twister as the restraints in her car were broken, leading her to slide around on the seat while the ride was in motion. Investigators into the second tragedy found that a host of errors, which included faulty seatbelts and the breaching of height regulations, were responsible for the boy's accident. The court heard that the youngster was not wearing a seatbelt on the Twister and fell through the gap between the seat and the restraining bar. His mother, who was in the car with him, says operators did not tell them to wear a restraint and that the safety bar did not secure the boy firmly in the seat. She says she started screaming when she saw him slip under the bar, flying out of the car as the ride hurtled about 3 meters off the ground. The hearing also found that not all ride operators understood the seatbelt and height safety limits for young children. According to the Twister guidelines, all children between 1.2 meters and 1.5 meters tall must wear seatbelts. But after viewing CCTV footage of the ride's daily operations and interviews with riders at the park, a health and safety executive found that this was simply not the case in practice. Further investigations found several safety belts on the ride were not working, and that even when safety belts were worn, significant gaps were still evident, which meant that smaller passengers were not secured. The investigators concluded that the accident was entirely avoidable, and that several children were put at risk due to the breach of safety regulations by Lightwater Valley theme park. The company was fined a total of £349,527, including legal costs. The original coaster's designers, Reverchon, went into liquidation in 2008 and filed for bankruptcy, shutting down its manufacturing plant. Its rival, Zamperla, continues to manufacture and distribute the Twister coaster after obtaining the license for its design during a brief agreement with Reverchon in 2003. The only design change Zamperla made is that the restraints are now mounted on the floor of the carriage, whereas Reverchon's restraints were pulled down overhead. The Twister didn't survive the rest of the 2019 season, and it was dismantled and subsequently sold to traveling showman Emerson Edwards. Lightwater Valley Amusement Park, which has been in operation since 1969, has had more than 10 safety incidents since the 1980s. Including a 17-year-old park worker who was paralyzed when he was crushed under the swinging gym ride. Then, in 1991, the Ultimate, Europe's longest roller coaster, was involved in a coaster collision, injuring 5 people. And in 2012, a 5-year-old's leg got trapped between the platform edge and the carriage of the Ladybird roller coaster. The park has since decommissioned all its thrill rides, like the Ultimate, the Black Pearl, a pendulum ride designed to look like a pirate ship, and the Wild River Rapids. It now bills itself as a family adventure park catering for younger park visitors. Next is the infamous Top Thrill Dragster accident of 2021 that led to a major redesign in the park. Imagine moving from a standstill to a breakneck 120 miles per hour in just 3.9 seconds. That's the promise that the Top Thrill Dragster roller coaster has delivered on since its first iconic ride in 2003. But the 420-foot-tall Cedar Point ride hasn't moved since a devastating accident left a woman with severe brain injuries. So in this video, I'm analyzing the incidents that ended the original Top Thrill Dragster. It's a warm Sunday in Ohio on August 15, 2021. 44-year-old Rachel Hawes has traveled from Swartz Creek, Michigan to experience the gravity-defying ride that lasts only 17 seconds. In reality, she has no idea that merely standing in line for this ride will change her life forever. As the Top Thrill Dragster hits the apex on its final descent, a piece of metal from one of the trains on the roller coaster breaks off during mid-ride and flies towards Hawes, hitting her in the back of the head. Her father, Robert Edmonds, witnesses the incident. He sees what looks like a black square flying in the air, hitting his daughter as the roller coaster train returns to the station. Where did the mysterious black square come from? And how did it end up flying off on the ride? When the Top Thrill Dragster launched in 2003, it was the tallest and fastest roller coaster in the world. The Cedar Point ride in Sandusky, Ohio uses the same propulsion as real-life dragster cars, transmitting around 10,000 horsepower to sweep across a drag strip in less than 4 seconds. In fact, the Top Thrill Dragster gives you the complete drag racing experience, with true-to-life countdown of the so-called Christmas tree light before the roller coaster springs into action. It then launches 400 feet straight into the air at a 90-degree incline and a speed of 120 miles per hour. The ride then cruises to the peak before it flies straight back down, with a 270-degree corkscrew twist on the way down. While there are no official figures for how many people were queuing to ride the Top Thrill Dragster that day, attendance records show that the ride can serve over 900 riders per hour through its turnstiles. According to another bystander, the object that struck the woman flew like a metal disc through the air. The witness, John McDermott, who was standing in line for the ride with his girlfriend and 6-year-old son, says he was around 20 feet from her when he saw a piece of metal about the size of the palm of his hand hit the crowd, and then saw the victim sink to the floor, screaming in agony. Also queuing in the line on that fateful afternoon was David Vallow, a registered nurse. He said the scene was majorly chaotic, with crowds of people screaming and jumping over the gates towards the exit. Vallow heard someone yell that a woman was hurt, so he ran through the crowd towards the commotion to find her. Then he and some of the other patrons took off their shirts to try to treat her injuries as best they could. The park's emergency medical services arrived shortly after that. EMS body camera footage shows a group of people surrounding the spot where Hawes was lying on the floor. It also captured an off-duty county sheriff's deputy explaining what he witnessed during the traumatic event.
We all saw it fly off.
So what did you actually head over to Iron Dragon and went down for the call?
On the top of one of those things and shot downwards.
Hawes was taken to a nearby hospital with what reports refer to as an unknown type of head injury. However, a statement released by her family a few days after the incident stated that she was in the ICU in critical condition with a brain injury. But what exactly was this unknown metal object that led to this horrifying experience? Following the shocking events, Ohio Department of Agriculture investigators, who inspect all the amusement rides in the state, descended on Cedar Point. They conducted post-accident inspections, fine-combed thousands of maintenance reports, witness reports, and laboratory findings, and interviewed more than 10 Cedar Point staff. It was later found that the piece of metal that struck Hawes in the back of her head was in fact an L-shaped bracket that connects to the back of the roller coaster car. Investigators explained that the bracket, roughly the size of an adult male's hand, is connected to the back of the car and is intended to hover over the track. The bracket, or proximity flag plate, effectively communicates with the roller coaster operating system, telling it that the train has passed over a specific portion of the track. Though during the ride's 420-foot descent, the bracket dislodged along with half the bolts which secured it and struck the victim in the head. According to the chief of amusement rides, David Miron, the Top Thrill Dragster was last inspected 3 months before the incident on May 14th, and no significant issues were discovered. The attraction therefore passed its statewide inspection, which declared it compliant on May 15th, 2021. And because of Tyler's Law, which came into effect in 2017 after the tragic death of Tyler Jarrell, who was flung from a ride at the Ohio State Fair, all roller coasters must be inspected twice a year by at least 2 inspectors. The Top Thrill Dragster's second inspection was due in September, with the park performing daily checks on the roller coaster. Following the accident, the $25 million ride was shut down for the rest of the 2021 season to allow for further investigations. In a report released 6 months after the incident, Ohio Department of Agriculture investigators found insufficient evidence to find Cedar Fair Entertainment Company, the holding company, guilty of any infringements. The lengthy 620-page report included an accident report of the ride, reviews of hundreds of maintenance records, witness accounts, and interviews with Cedar Point staff. According to the Department of Agriculture, the investigation wasn't established to determine the cause of the accident, but rather to guarantee the park followed all the laws and regulations to ensure the ride was safe for its patrons. Therefore, found no negligence, stating the ride, including the flag plate, had been inspected the evening before the accident and did not find any damage. The full report noted that the bolts, which were intact on the morning of the 15th, failed by instantaneous overload fracture. One had suddenly fractured between the head and the bolt's body at some point between the earlier maintenance checks and the incident. Additionally, interviews with the maintenance staff involved with the upkeep and operation of the track and the roller coaster listed 2 other instances in the months leading up to the accident where staff had replaced missing bolts on the Top Thrill Dragster. And a maintenance record from days before indicates that one worker had tightened 16 brake bolts and repaired a hitting brake on August 13th. The park's manager of ride maintenance said the proximity flag plates at the back of each roller coaster train are removed and then replaced every year during the park's off-season. With reduced usage during the COVID pandemic, the overhaul was scaled back in consultation with the ride's manufacturer, Intamin. Investigators, however, said they considered this when they found that the park had not committed any violations, stating that Cedar Point had adhered to its reduced overhaul agreement. The report concluded that Cedar Point's maintenance program for the roller coaster was per the manufacturer's recommendations. It found that based on maintenance records, staff had been actively inspecting and making the necessary repairs and performing preventative maintenance to the roller coaster. A stop operation order has been imposed by the state following an inspection of the ride on August 16th, one day after the incident in 2021. It listed a series of defects, such as multiple loose bolts in fixed brake fins and the brake framework. Additionally, numerous bolts were found to be of a different or improper grade, and several mechanical issues were found pertaining to the train cars. It also found suspected damage to the ride's brake assembly. And the 2021 incident was not the first. The ride was frequently closed for maintenance associated with the complicated hydraulic launch system.
And each one of those mechanical or electrical components has a failure life. It's going to go bad at some point. There are so many components in this system that we have to keep on top of them.
On July 14, 2004, 4 people were pelted by flying debris while on the ride. Reports found that the launch cable, which resembles a thick metal rope, frayed during the launch, shearing off pieces of metal that hit the riders. Their injuries were not life-threatening, mainly abrasions and cuts, which were treated at the park. In a later incident on August 7, 2016, 4 riders were also hit by flying debris while on the coaster after the launch cable detached from the ride. 2 were treated for minor injuries, and the Top Thrill was closed the following day for investigations. Following the 2021 incident, the ride remained out of commission. After 19 seasons in operation, with 18 million riders experiencing the world's first strata coaster, Top Thrill Dragster As You Know It is being retired. In August 2023, Cedar Point confirmed speculations about the coaster's transformation. Plans were announced to overhaul the ride, transitioning its launch system to use linear synchronous motors. The revamped roller coaster is now set to be a triple-launched experience, with its unveiling scheduled for 2024 under the new name, Top Thrill 2. It's unknown what's become of Rachel Hawes or if she recovered from her injuries. The last statement released by the family was a few days after the incident in 2021, when the victim was transported to St. Vincent's Hospital in Toledo. The family said they were devastated by the accident at Cedar Point and thanked everyone for their thoughts and prayers. They said that Rachel was fighting for her life and that the family would like some privacy. This tragic accident won't prevent more than 380 million people from taking about 1.7 billion roller coaster rides in parks across the U.S. annually. In 2021, Adventureland's Raging River incident revealed a disturbing list of safety violations. A birthday celebration turned deadly on July 3, 2021, when 11-year-old Michael Jaramillo drowned on the Raging River ride at Iowa's Adventureland amusement park. The family was there to celebrate his brother David's upcoming 16th birthday. Sadly, the Rapids ride took a sudden turn as their raft capsized. Michael and his brother David couldn't release their seatbelt restraint, leaving them trapped and drowning as their parents shouted for help. Why did the 800-kilogram raft flip over? How was the emergency handled at the park? And what did the official investigation uncover? These are the questions I wanted to answer when I started my research.
Come on over to Adventureland. You're gonna have a fun-filled day.
And there's just a few weekends left at Adventureland. Don't stop.
There's always something new at Adventureland.
Advertised as a great way to cool off with the whole family, the Raging River ride had been a staple of the Adventureland resort since its opening in 1983. On the ride, 6-person rafts move through faux river rapids. Raging River's designer, Intamin Amusement Rides from Liechtenstein, is well known for its thrill ride and roller coaster designs featured at amusement parks worldwide. So, how did such a popular ride end in disaster? The chain of events started on July 2, 2021, one day before the fatal accident. An inspection carried out by the Iowa State Inspector, Bruno J. Burriola, was passed. He checked the newly installed control system on the ride's operation and visually inspected the boats. It had passed all inspections carried out in 5 years before this. In April, the inspection checked the station and TRA without the boats and water. Additionally, just a month before, the boats were physically inspected. According to Borriola, the ride performed as it should the day before the incident. July 3, 2021, 3 p.m., 4.5 hours before the accident. Maintenance staff removed several rafts from the ride for a deflated bladder, including boat number 2, which would carry the Jaramillo family a few hours later. Each of the boat's 8 bladders were monitored and routinely taken out to be refilled with air or replaced if they became deflated. 5:45 p.m. Except for one, all the repaired rafts were returned to the ride. Boat number 2 was back in service. Although the quality of those boat repairs would be closely questioned later, at the time, all seemed to be in working order. Shortly afterward, 31-year-old Amber Estrada went on the ride with her family. They experienced problems with the raft during the journey, leaving the mother of 3 feeling unsafe. She told reporters that the boat often got stuck under her feet, making a grinding sound. The Estrada family decided to lean forward in their seats to stop their raft from capsizing. Amber didn't report the incident to the park because her autistic son was upset and they needed to leave. Sometime before 7:30 p.m., the Jaramillo family, David Sr., his wife Sabrina, and their young adult niece and 3 sons ages 11, 14, and 15 boarded boat number 2 and began moving along the rapids on the ride. The family realized that their raft was slowly filling with water along the route. It then bumped into rocks placed along the ride designed to move the raft further along.
When it flipped over, all of us were trapped in the seats and the seatbelts. I see the silhouettes of my sons trying to grab each other, grab us. They wanted us to help them. We couldn't do it.
I will never get a chance to see him grow up.
David Sr. became trapped between the capsized raft and rocks. He broke his shoulder in a desperate attempt to escape and free his trapped sons. Then, adding to the chaos, the boat behind the Jaramillos came down the river and knocked into their upturned raft. It managed to pass, continuing to the end of the ride. Passengers jumped into the water when the next boat came past to help. They were quickly joined by workers preparing nearby fireworks who heard screaming and rushed to help. 7:30 p.m. A 911 call came into the Altoona Dispatch Center just outside of Des Moines, Iowa. The dispatcher struggled to understand the emergency over screaming voices.
911 address to emergency.
Hello, we're at Adventureland Park. There's been an accident on the yellow ride that we're on right now.
The caller was Emmanuel Rico, a 16-year-old boy from Nevada who was 2 boats ahead on the Raging River ride. As he watched the horror from the raft he was in, he told the operator about David Sr. screaming for help. The panicked father was already covered in bruises. According to the 911 caller, there were no staff members by the river watching the rafts. Frantic bystanders alerted off-duty Altoona police and fire medics working alongside park security that day. They then rushed across the park to help. Park employees were still seemingly unaware. Meanwhile, the 911 dispatch center managed to figure out Rico's location during the frantic call and immediately sent help. 7:45 p.m. Firemen, police, and ambulances arrived on the scene. They followed the prearranged protocol and went to the emergency entrance, a set of park gates designed for fast access during a crisis. To their dismay, the access gates were chained shut. Emergency officials moved to Gate 2, the closest access to the water ride. However, preparations for a July 4th fireworks show entirely blocked the area. As a result, the ambulance could only reach 100 meters from the site, adding crucial minutes to their response time. On arrival, emergency personnel discovered that the rapids ride wasn't drained and still had 60 centimeters of water standing in the trough surrounding the Jaramillo's boat. The family later estimated that their sons were trapped underwater in the upside-down raft for around 10 minutes, unable to release their seatbelts to escape. Their youngest, Michael, died the following day as a result of the accident. Their middle son, August, suffered only minor scrapes and bruises. David Jr., the oldest of the 3, suffered from oxygen deprivation and spent a month on life support. Initially, he was placed in a medically induced coma. When he first regained consciousness, he could neither see nor speak. He has since regained his vision, speech, and is walking and eating solid food. As news of the accident made headlines, the main question remained: why did the raft flip over? The state immediately ordered that the ride shut down. The next morning, a full inspection was performed in daylight, searching for answers. The Iowa Division of Labor investigator confirmed that the raft touched the bottom of the water trough multiple times during the Haramio's trip down the river, causing it to deflate partially. The inspector identified scrape marks in the concrete and fresh gouges in the wooden weirs. As the air left the raft, it turned upside down on the ride's final curve, forcing the Haramio family into the water. The Haramio's boat was left with one of its bladders deflated and an exterior indentation on the outer rubber tube. The boats weighed 800 kilograms each and had a heavy metal plate on the bottom for stability. According to Guy Cook, an attorney representing Adventureland, the boats would not flip due to a single deflated bladder. He believes with the weight on the boats also evenly distributed, it would be extremely difficult for the massive raft to flip over, even if one of the bladders had deflated. The attorney boldly stated the ride is clearly safe and has run thousands of times over the past 40 years without incident. Essentially, the resort claims there had to be other factors at play. Not only did the raft flip when it technically shouldn't have, the water in that section also didn't fully drain, leaving the family trapped in 60 centimeters of water. If the ride was functioning as it should have during previous inspections, why didn't the water drain? The investigation confirmed that the ride operator did, in fact, hit the emergency stop button once they discovered the accident. This should have rapidly drained all the water on the course into the ride's 4.5 million liters reservoir. The ride is designed as one long downhill course surrounding the reservoir and terminating with an outlet into that retainer. Therefore, if the pumps are stopped, the force of gravity will drain the entire ride, allowing for safe maintenance or rescue operations. One theory discussed online is that the reservoir might have been overfilled at the time of the accident, likely from rainwater. As a result, water will gather in the ride, leaving a part of the course flooded. A 2009 aerial photograph of the ride shows the final stretch underwater while the pumps are turned off. You can see a yellow boat stranded in the same section where the Haramio's raft flipped over and got stuck. A Facebook post showed Raging River in this same overfilled condition 1 week before the accident. The inspection before the 2021 season was performed while the ride, including the reservoir, was fully drained. The inspector stated that the emergency stop and water draining system were not tested at that time. It would have been nearly impossible to recognize the risk of rafts stranding on the course without seeing the ride filled with water. In contrast to Adventureland's claims, there have been numerous incidents involving riders globally. Since 1984, 21 accidents have been recorded, with 8 fatalities. The potential dangers on rapids rides have been apparent enough to amusement park operators that the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions released recommendations on their safe operation. For example, parks must have surveillance and a public address system that will cover the entire ride. Trained staff have to be on site, which is an area that Adventureland fell short on. Full water rescue and evacuation procedures need to be in place for circumstances like Haramio's. These should also be timed and reviewed, as businesses would with fire drills. Another of the park's shortfalls that the association recommends is access points and pathways to the trough system. And emergency stops with the intended effect on water must be tested. If these had been followed, there is great potential that Michael Haramio would still be alive. After the accident, state inspectors found 17 safety violations related to the ride. The weirs or dams were replaced with incorrect parts and insufficient repairs. These included operating with inadequate air pressures in the raft's bladders. Instead of professional repairs, the leaks were hastily patched with Flex Seal, a TV infomercial product.
The super strong waterproof tape!
The ropes on the rafts were found to be tied up incorrectly, and staff's response to back-to-back raft releases was described as inadequate. Further to these, after the fixes, the park failed to test the ride without passengers. Then, regarding the evacuation plan, the route for removing injured guests had not been updated with park changes, slowing down the emergency response. Worse still, the report acknowledged the fireworks setup blocked the route. The remaining findings dealt with lacking ride supervision, poor evacuation planning, missing documentation, and inadequate staff training across all levels of responsibility. Months after the accident, Adventureland and the Iowa State inspectors have continued to focus on an inexplicable error with the raft. Despite the park's assertion that the ride had been emergency stopped, they don't seem half as curious as to why the water never fully drained from the trough. To date, many questions are left unanswered, like why it took staff so long to respond and how the ride passed an inspection. With the park closed for the season, time will tell whether Adventureland will be stricter in its adherence to industry safety features in the future. If you want to read more in depth about what went wrong, Spencer Thompson wrote a great article that I've linked in the description. Moving on from one water tragedy, we can't forget the Branson duck boat incident. The introduction of duck boats into military combat in the 1920s was a game changer, an amphibious vehicle with the ability to maneuver both on land and at sea. A car so revolutionary that some historians believe that it helped the Allies secure victory in World War II. But almost 60 years later, and modified for tourists, they have become known as death traps following the deaths of nearly 40 people in recent years. On July 19, 2018, a duck boat carrying 31 people capsized on Table Rock Lake in near hurricane conditions. 17 people died when the duck boat sank due to an incoming storm. The 70-minute excursion usually starts on land with a tour of Branson's tourist sites. But survivor Tia says the tour operator indicated they would do the lake part of the tour first, as stormy weather was predicted. Less than 30 minutes later, the amphibious vehicle would sink to the bottom of the lake. According to survivors, Captain Scott McKee pointed out the location of the life jackets but maintained that the passengers would not need them. Neither federal nor Missouri law requires passengers to wear life jackets on commercial vessels. But soon after, as the duck boat started its water excursion, the storm struck, with 70-mile-per-hour winds creating swells between 3 to 5 feet high. Coleman was sitting near the front of the duck boat and said she didn't immediately suspect danger when the vessel started bobbing up and down in the turbulent waters. She says the passengers were told to remain seated when the heavy waves started bashing the boat. She only started panicking when a huge wave crashed across the bow and water started gushing in. Coleman then crashed into something hard as the boat began taking on water. Soon she lost sight of everyone when the water surrounded her. The last thing she heard before the boat went down was the desperate plea of her sister-in-law to grab the baby. Coleman and her 13-year-old nephew Donovan were the only 2 family members out of the 11 to survive. Her husband, 3 children, mother and father-in-law, her nephew, sister-in-law, and uncle all went down with the boat. At the same time, 14-year-old Lauren Smith was on the duck boat with her 53-year-old father Sam and her 15-year-old brother Lance. The family from Arkansas was on their annual holiday in Branson and wanted to experience a duck boat ride. Her mother Pam, however, stayed on land. Lauren says the weather looked good, and the water seemed calm before they set off on the duck boat. But shortly after leaving land, the weather worsened as heavy swells started battering the boat. Her mother, Pam, said her husband called her just before the boat sank, saying the situation didn't look good and that he loved her. She would never see her husband or son alive again. Another survivor, 12-year-old Alicia Dennison from Illinois, says her grandmother Leslie Dennison died while trying to save her. She felt Leslie pushing her upward from below toward the surface as the boat sank. 15-year-old Jillian Collins was on the boat with her family and said the windows were sealed and passengers were briefly stuck under the ship's canopy as the boat went down. The captain reportedly managed to release the canopy, allowing them to swim to the surface. According to her father, Shane, it took all his strength to swim to the surface as the sinking boat was sucking people downward. Miraculously, the entire Collins family of 9 managed to survive the ordeal. Eyewitness Braden Molaski was on the showboat Branson Bell when they spotted the duck boat. He was filming on deck and captured the last moments before the boat sank. His short video shows how the wind gusts were causing waves to crash over the boat, with water only inches from the windows. The footage ends seconds before the boat reportedly capsized. Eyewitnesses said the passengers spilled out of the vessel as the ship went down. The Branson Bell's captain threw around 60 life jackets into the water, hoping that the scattered duckboat passengers could stay afloat until they could be reached. Tragically, 17 people lost their lives that evening when the boat sank, a mere 250 feet from the dock. The owners of the duckboat company, Ripley Entertainment, said they had never had a single accident in over 40 years of operation. Company president Jim Pattison Jr. blamed the sudden onset of the storm for the tragedy, but the National Weather Service issued a severe thunderstorm watch, warning of wind speeds in excess of 70 miles per hour at about 20 past 11 that morning, nearly 8 hours before the boat sank. As the storm made its way to Branson, the Weather Services issued a second severe thunderstorm warning around 6:30 p.m., just half an hour before the boat went down in Table Rock Lake. Survivor accounts also contradict the notion that the storm came out of nowhere, as the captain told them before they set off for the water tour that a storm was expected. 5 days after the boat went down, salvage operations brought the wreck to the surface for further investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board, better known as the NTSB. It would take another 2 years for the NTSB to release the report on their findings. It found that the probable cause of the accident was due to Ride the Ducks Branson's continued operation of water tours despite warnings of severe thunderstorms. It also faulted the Coast Guard for not implementing reserve buoyancy in amphibious vehicles. That's basically the surface of the ship's area above the waterplane that can be water sealed to increase the vessel's buoyancy. Additionally, the Coast Guard was blamed for not taking action against vehicles with a fixed canopy that hampered passengers' escape. The NTSB said the failure to implement 22 recommendations made after a 1999 duckboat accident that killed 13 people in Arkansas contributed significantly to the accident. It found that only 9 out of the 22 recommendations were adhered to, and that design flaws, like insufficient freeboard clearance between the deck and the waterline, as well as the mounted canopies overhead, remained a hazard for the operation of tourist duckboats. A video recorder and SD card were retrieved from the wrecked ship, which investigators would review to piece together events leading up to the sinking. The report showed that the captain concluded a safety briefing about 10 minutes before the wind gusts picked up, detailing the location of emergency exits and life jackets. Less than 3 minutes later, the captain is heard making a call over the radio, and seconds later, a bilge alarm goes off, which the captain apparently silenced. A second radio call can be heard where he relates that water was occasionally splashing into the passenger compartment before the audio cuts out. It's believed the vehicle was still on the water's surface at the time of that last call. The report stated that the flooding happened in a non-weathertight air intake hatch situated on the bow. The boat's captain, Kenneth Scott McKee, who survived, was charged with 17 counts of misconduct, inattention to duty by a ship's officer, and negligence. Each count represents a life lost in the accident. A year later, Ride the Ducks Branson's general manager and the manager on duty at the time were added to the charge sheet. The 3 were also charged with involuntary manslaughter. But in April 2022, the court dismissed all charges against the men. According to the Missouri judge, the unique characteristics of the duck boat led to its rapid sinking. It was also found that the employees used radar from a private meteorological company for weather reports. The radar reportedly only showed rain for that day, and no wind reports were indicated. Therefore, the staff knew about the storm, but did not know about the storm's dangerously strong winds. The NTSB found that the storm that hit Branson that fateful day was determined to be a derecho, a type of storm associated with widespread winds and thunderstorms capable of destruction akin to a tornado. By January 2020, Ripley Entertainment, which also owns rights to Ripley's Believe It or Not, settled the last of the victims' lawsuits for a vast but undisclosed amount of money. Earlier reports, however, indicated that the victim settlement could be in the vicinity of $100 million. Andrew Duffy, whose law firm handled 2 duckboat-related litigations in Philadelphia, maintains duckboats are death traps because their design is not suitable for water or land, as it is half car and half boat. Interestingly enough, the designer of the Stretch Duck 7 was a self-taught entrepreneur without any formal engineering training. Designer Robert McDowell, the former owner of the Ride the Ducks company, testified in a deposition for a wrongful death lawsuit following a 2015 accident when a duck boat collided with a bus, killing 5 college students. McDowell taught himself how to build and maintain the duck boats, even though he had completed only 2 years of college and had no background in mechanics. Duckboat tours were suspended in Branson after the incident in 2018, but resumed in 2022. The new tour operators no longer use the old duckboat design and have introduced the Hydra-Terra. The new amphibious tour bus is reportedly safer due to its foam-filled hull, which will prevent sinking. The Hydra-Terra still has a canopy, but no longer has the side curtains like its predecessor. The new operator, Branson Duck Tours, says the updated design is the only Coast Guard-approved vessel that has proved to be unsinkable. Sadly, the new duckboat design will offer very little reassurance to the families of the 17 people who lost their lives on Table Rock Lake in 2018. When screams echoed through Luna Park, it was for all the wrong reasons. What caused this coaster fire disaster might come as a surprise. An evening of unbridled fun for families and youngsters at Sydney's Luna Park comes to a fiery end when 7 people lose their lives in a devastating inferno. Soon, shocking allegations of police corruption, arson, and organized crime follow. Now, more than 40 years later, authorities hope a $1 million reward will help families find answers to the haunting mystery of what really happened on that night in 1979. Sydney's Luna Park, with its fantasy architecture, has been operational since 1935. Thousands of families have made lifelong memories inside the Art Deco-style themed attraction with its gaping mouth gates. But in June 1979, an incident changed that perception after a father, his 2 sons, and 4 primary school friends were killed on the park's most popular ride. The Ghost Train was one of the highlights of the venue. The 2.5-minute-long ride snaked through a maze of dark tunnels where imitation ghouls and beasts were hiding around every twist and turn. It seated 2 people in cars shaped like little train engines, transporting riders through 600 feet of electric track filled with frightening scenes, hairpin bends, and an imitation fire. Just after 10 p.m. on the night of June 9th, however, some riders noticed real flames coming from the imitation fire scene about 3/4 of the way into the ride. Thinking it was part of the adventure, they decided against reporting it. 5 best friends from Waverly were looking forward to the scary Ghost Train. It was their first evening out alone without the escort of their families, and the teen boys were having the time of their lives. They had no clue that only one of them would leave the park alive. According to survivor Jason Holman, his 4 friends boarded the 2 carriages in front of him. He sat alone in the next one and said that although they were excited, the boys were also a little nervous about the ride. More than 30 other riders were also in their cars, getting ready for the ghoulish experience. Holman watched as his friends' cars entered the swinging entrance doors marked Hell's Doorway. But as his car made its way to the entrance, he was ripped out of the ride by one of the park attendants. Initially, Holman didn't see any signs of a blaze. He was bewildered by the attendant who yanked him out of the moving cart. Moments later, he saw the smoke billowing out from the entrance, and then the screaming began. With no sprinklers to slow it down, the fire spread quickly. Soon, riders were trapped in darkness as the smoke and flames engulfed the ghost train. Passengers stumbled out from the ride structure, while some kicked at the partition walls, desperate to find a way out of the fiery maze. As Holman watched the scenes of mayhem and flames unfold, he saw soot-covered passengers emerging from the ride. But what happened next would be replayed in his mind's eye ever since. Flaming empty carriages exiting the ride on the mechanical track. His 4 friends were nowhere to be seen. Standing next to Holman was a grief-stricken woman with a dripping ice cream cone. It would later come to light that the woman was Jenny Godson. Godson, her husband, and 2 kids traveled from Warren on a family holiday. It was the first time their children, aged 2 and 4, visited the coast, and they were enjoying their time at the amusement park. At the end of the evening, the family still had 4 ride tickets left, and the boys decided to blow it on the ghost train. As they headed for the ride, Godson was overcome with what she called a bizarre craving for ice cream, which she usually didn't eat. She told her family to go ahead and wait for her at the entrance to the ride while she grabbed a cone. Little did she know that it would be the last time she would see her family alive.
I was from the country. I came down here to share a night with my family, and my whole world just sort of fell to pieces.
As she made her way back to the ghost train, she saw smoke pouring out of the ride, but her sons and husband were missing. Meanwhile, survivors recounted their car being surrounded by flames as high as 13 feet when they reached the exit.
The place just went up. People in it and out, flames were just gushing out and smoke, heavy, like Frank and I were choking just about. Even now, I can't breathe properly because the smoke's still in my lungs. The place just went up.
Luna Park staff braved the burning inferno and heavy smoke, running inside to usher people out of the dark maze. Staff had initially thought that all the riders had made it out alive, but the empty cars emerging from the train tunnel told a different story. Emergency services raced to the scene, but due to inadequate water supply at the park, they were forced to source water directly from the harbor, which hampered their firefighting efforts. When the fire was finally extinguished at around 11:30 p.m., rescuers made the gruesome discovery. The remains of Godson's family were found huddled together in a dark tunnel. The bodies of the 4 friends from Waverly were uncovered in another section of the ride. They were just 13 years old. Hours later, the lead investigator of the fire, Detective Inspector Doug Knight, shut down any arson theories.
We're now satisfied that the fire was as a result of an electrical fault within the building.
Inspector Knight had ordered the demolition and cleaning up of the ghost train site and oversaw the destruction of the remaining rubble. Less than half a day after the fire was extinguished, it was bulldozed and the ruins removed. The rapid clearing of the site flies in the face of police procedure, which should have seen the area cordoned off after the bodies were removed to preserve evidence from being destroyed or contaminated. 2 days after the tragedy, a victim's mother visited the scene of her son's death to lay a flower at the site. According to her, there was no crime scene tape or even officers on the scene. She thought it very unusual that the only thing left of the ghost train was the floor. But even so, the police narrative remained resolute that an electrical fault indeed caused the fire. Luna Park closed its doors for 3 years after the fire and opened up again under new management in 1982. For many, though, the idea that an electrical fault caused the fire simply did not ring true. But why were they so adamant it was arson? In 1977, 2 years before the fatal incident, the fire brigade warned Luna Park authorities of the risks posed by the ghost train's wooden tunnel. The concern was that it wasn't fitted with emergency lights or exit signs. The park also failed to heed a warning to install a sprinkler system and add a hose reel inside the ride. By May 1979, fire protective measures had still not been implemented, and operators were given another 12 months to effect the necessary changes. The blaze broke out weeks later. According to a fire inspector who reviewed the train in 1977, the ride's interior was a complete maze, with black painted timber making it challenging to see even when the lights were on. He said he could only navigate his way out of the labyrinth by following the railway track. 9 weeks after the blaze, a coronial inquest speculated that a discarded cigarette butt, lack of lighting, signage, and the dark labyrinth-like tunnels all contributed to the tragedy. At the end of his investigation, the coroner found that Luna Park had failed in its duty of care to patrons, but not to the extent to support a charge of criminal negligence. The inquiry found that the 7 deaths were caused by carbon monoxide poisoning and burns, but that the deaths were ultimately accidental. It would later unfold that there was no evidence to support that suggestion. According to reports, there were several no-smoking signs on the ride. On top of that, no passengers had seen or smelled cigarette smoke that evening. 8 years later, in 1987, the National Crime Authority opened another investigation into the tragedy. But while no new evidence surfaced, authorities found the previous investigations were inadequate and ineffective. It would take another 34 years before the families of the victims would get some concrete answers to what happened on that evening in 1979. Journalist Carl Meldrum Hanna uncovered a treasure trove of serious flaws in the way police handled the investigation. It included missing witness statements, the irregular cleaning of the fire scene, as well as the involvement of shady, underworld characters. Her research was backed up and supported with previously unseen documents and recorded interviews by artist Martin Sharp. Sharp, who was responsible for repainting the iconic Luna Park laughing face, never believed the fire was an accident. Several witnesses had told police they smelled highly flammable kerosene, a type of paraffin, near the imitation fireplace inside the ride, which was reportedly the ignition point of the inferno. But these reports were never investigated by police. Witnesses also mentioned a group of nefarious-looking men dressed like bikers, or bikies, in the vicinity of the ghost train around the time of the fire. Les Dowd, a teenager at the time, told police that he overheard a group of denim-clad bikies talking about spreading kerosene out and lighting it with a match. According to Dowd, he heard one of them say, quote, "You're a fool for doing it," and started running towards the exit. The numerous witnesses, however, say they had felt pressured or even bullied by police to follow a different narrative from what they had seen that night. Even more sinister are the claims of police corruption which implicated the lead investigator, Doug Knight, with organized crime syndicates. It's believed Knight was a so-called fixer who would take money from criminals to manipulate investigations. In fact, newly uncovered reports from senior New South Wales police officers alleging that crime boss Abe Saffron, or Mr. Sin as he was known, personally ordered the ghost train fire. His motive for the arson? Prime waterfront real estate. These claims would further develop when, after the fire, Luna Park was sold to a rather dubious tender with family links to Saffron. Further investigation showed that arson had been Mr. Sin's weapon of choice when it came to attacks on business properties he wanted to acquire for himself, and Doug Knight, as his fixer, allowed him to get away with murder. Saffron died in 2006, but a year after his death, his niece revealed to the Sydney Morning Herald that her uncle was responsible for the ghost train fire, but that no one was supposed to die. The fire, she said, was set to gain control of the park lease for himself. A day after the interview, the niece demanded that the story not be published. She would later deny making the revelations attributed to her, even though the interview had been recorded. In April 2021, the state coroner formally requested the New South Wales police authorities to review all the evidence concerning the cause and origin of the fire, as well as the circumstances surrounding the resulting deaths. Then, in July 2021, the police minister announced that the investigation would be reopened and gave people 1 million reasons to come forward with new information.
I'm delighted that the government has seen fit to offer a $1 million reward. It is appropriate given the public interest in this investigation. The passage of time has made it just that little bit more difficult for us to get evidence, and that's why I'm appealing to members of the public. If they know anything, even if they think that they've passed it on, please come back to the New South Wales Police and offer up any information they believe may be related to this incident.
Families of the victims have welcomed the reopening of investigations, hoping that fresh leads could help them find the closure they so badly need. But after more than 4 decades, it's discouraging to think of all the possible evidence and witness statements lost due to corruption at the highest levels, and how a system meant to protect failed the 7 victims. Today, a refurbished ghost train still runs at Luna Park. If you found this episode interesting, watch this one next. And if you like, leave a comment to support the channel.